You're not stuck because you don't know what to do. You're stuck because every time things start to change, you return to the person you've always been. And that person keeps creating the same outcomes, not because they want to, because it's familiar. Maybe you've noticed this before. You make a plan. You get motivated. You actually start seeing results. For a few days, or maybe a few weeks. Then somehow you drift. The habits disappear. The focus disappears, and your momentum completely evaporates. Eventually, you're back where you started. Then you make another plan. Watch another video. Read another book, and promise yourself this time will be different. But deep down, it's becoming harder to believe. Because at some point, the problem stops feeling like a lack of information. You already know what to do. Exercise, apply for the job, start the business, have the conversation, set the boundary, wake up earlier, stop procrastinating. You know what to do. But knowing isn't changing anything. And that's what makes it so frustrating. You start wondering if you're lazy, undisciplined, unmotivated, maybe even broken or not meant for the things you want. But what if none of those explanations are actually true? Most people think change happens at the level of behavior. But behavior is usually the last thing to change. The deeper layer is identity. Identity is the story your brain has accepted about who you are, not who you want to be, who you believe you are. And once that identity forms, your mind starts protecting it, even when it hurts you. Think about someone who sees themselves as an anxious person. They may try to become more confident, but when they enter a situation that requires confidence, their brain immediately searches for evidence that supports the old identity. The anxiety returns, so the old reactions and behaviors also return. Because the old identity remained untouched. The same thing happens everywhere. The person who sees themselves as someone who never finishes things. The person who sees themselves as unlucky. The person who sees themselves as always behind. The person who sees themselves as someone who wastes potential. These identities become invisible instructions. And eventually those instructions start running automatically. This creates what I call an identity loop. Your identity creates behavior. Your behavior creates evidence. That evidence strengthens your identity. Then the cycle repeats. Identity, behavior, evidence, identity, again and again and again. The loop becomes so normal that you stop seeing it. You only notice the outcome. You never notice the system creating it. Imagine a thermostat. If you set a thermostat to 68 degrees, it doesn't matter if the room temporarily reaches 75. The system pulls everything back towards 68. Many people approach change the same way. They change their actions for a while. But their internal setting stays at the set point. So eventually they return to what feels normal. They get what no longer serves them in exchange for what they dream of. That's why you feel stuck. You're trying to create a new life using an old identity. This is where most people misunderstand the problem. They think they're failing at change. What's actually happening is consistency between identity and behavior. Your brain is doing exactly what it was designed to do. Create alignment. The problem is that it's aligning with an outdated version of you. The version that was built years ago. Maybe from childhood, maybe from repeated disappointments. Maybe from years of proving the same story to yourself. At some point, that story became your reality. And now your behavior keeps confirming it. So the goal isn't forcing yourself harder. The goal is interrupting the loop. Because once you see the loop, You stop treating every setback as proof that you're incapable. You start recognizing it as evidence that an old identity is trying to reassert itself. That's a completely different interpretation, and it changes everything. Here's shift number 1. Start paying attention to the labels you repeatedly use for yourself, not publicly, privately, the things you say in your own head. I'm always behind. I'm bad with money. I never stick to anything. I'm not disciplined. Notice how often those statements sound like facts. Most aren't facts. They're conclusions. Conclusions built from repeated experiences. Number 2, look for moments when you act outside the old identity, even small ones. Most people ignore these moments, but they're important. If you believe you're undisciplined, then one act of discipline matters. If you believe you're shy, then one confident conversation matters. Your brain is constantly collecting evidence. Start giving it new evidence. Number 3. Stop asking, how do I become motivated enough to change? Start asking, what identity would naturally produce this behavior? Because motivation comes and goes. Identity tends to stay. A person who sees themselves as someone who follows through doesn't need constant motivation to follow through. The behavior feels consistent with who they are. Number 4. Expect resistance. Not because you're doing something wrong, because you're challenging familiarity. People often think discomfort means the change isn't working. Sometimes discomfort is proof that the old identity is losing influence. The unfamiliar can feel wrong before it feels normal. That's part of the process. Here's the main point I want to close with. If you've been feeling stuck for years, consider this possibility. Maybe the problem isn't that you haven't found the right strategy. Maybe you've been carrying the same identity into every strategy you've tried. And that's why every new beginning eventually looks like the last one. Real change starts when you stop fighting individual behaviors and start noticing the version of yourself creating them. Because the strongest force in your life isn't motivation. It isn't discipline. It isn't willpower. It's the story you continuously return to about who you are. Change that story, and the loop begins to break.